Hello, in this video we will learn how to use LiteDB in .NET MAUI. Now it is a good option because it sort of gets rid of your dependency of that secure storage where you might store your JSON arrangements. You have to make them into a simple string, and that can obviously create some problems. This LiteDB arrangement sort of takes care of all that, and more importantly, the way you use it, it's sort of more similar to, say, EF Core. Of course, a lot more lightweight. You don't have the whole setup, but you will have a model. You will have all kinds of extensions and on that model from which you have your essentially list. So it's quite straightforward. There are a few bits and pieces in setting it up. So let's take a look at that. First of all, you need your .NET MAUI project, and you need to install this LiteDB NuGet package. That's all you need, no additional things, just the LiteDB. Then you'll need to do a bit of setup in the MauiProgram.cs. Right? This is the latest version of it. We're in .NET 10, basically the latest possible arrangement. And what you do need to add, the only thing, you need to add a little singleton registration, LiteDB node service. Let's zoom in a bit so it's clearer. LiteDB node service. That's it. That's all you need. And now you're ready to use it. For your actual sort of, let's say, database tables, you simply create little class models like this. This is a bit of a note here, and you can actually find this code sample in Patreon. It's a very straightforward. We just have a little node app, sort of local node app, private node app, if you will, that will only stay on your phone. So this is the arrangement that we have. This is our little table. And again, it's just a simple class. The only thing to know that names with ID will auto increment, so something to remember. Of course, you could just use a string and do a GUID instead, so the options basically are the same as should in any normal databases. Quite a good thing as well, you don't actually need to convert types to different arrangements. You have your integers, you have your strings, so it's not like SQL Server, Postgres, for example. You might have different data types for different things, so you have to look at that or use some kind of arrangement in that regard. Again, it's very sort of similar to EF Core. So now let's get into the actual LiteDB service, LiteDB node service as we call it here. So this is the kind of thing you have to implement for whatever action you actually need to take. You can do it more directly in code behind or some of that nature, but it helps to implement this sort of service for kind of finding the path. So we essentially just inject a LiteDatabase, which we registered, and then we will need a way to kind of find it or to store the actual database. So it's a file with extension .db. That's your file, and it's always the best idea to just store it in AppDataDirectory. What you can also do, you can upload it to perhaps some external storage if you want to sync those files. There's obviously options with synchronization in a more sort of long-term database on your servers and whatnot. But you store it in AppDataDirectory. You find it from File System. That's so quite important thing because you might have permission problems in other locations. And then we just construct the LiteDatabase like this, and that's it. And then we get the collection. So that's gonna be our collection, our little table, which is nodes. So it's kind of similar to EF Core mapping perhaps, but you kind of do it in one sort of page in one service, which we inject, and then we can reuse it. You do a little wrapper for this, and that's it. Now, you could also just expose the collection directly. There's nothing wrong with that, but it kind of makes it more simple in this sort of arrangement. Now, as far as actual search goes, you start with query, so that gets you access to the database, perhaps slightly different from EF-core, but you start with query, and everything else will be just simple links, so you'll be able to sort by and do where statements and find things and first or default and all those things. So kind of a simple, straightforward arrangement. There's just one thing to remember. You need to get your collection based on your model, which matches with some name that you want to use, right? You'll write it, you need to match the name to which you write and to which you read. And of course, the model has to stay the same. Now, if you update it, you can do that. Changing names inside it, inside the nodes, so property names, for example, it can get a bit tricky, so you should lay it out quite properly before you actually mess with it, because you might need to recreate it, because we don't have a sort of proper migration here. It just gets created essentially, so something to kind of consider. And then after that we have the query, and then we just use a link, whatever we want, to list, to dictionary, whatever it might be, and ascending orders. Now adding it, again, the same thing. As long as we have the reference, we can add it, which we use insert. We insert newly constructed object, and that's it. And then we return what we inserted. And then for delete, we use delete. And then if we just quickly go into notes, there are a few more of these arrangements. We have update, and you also have very conveniently UpdateMany, so you can update in bulk. And there are a few other options, but essentially you have your basic sort of ones, and all kinds of search arrangements. So you can update, insert, delete, and of course query, and then search. And with that said, we will conclude this video.